I still remember that afternoon because nothing about it felt important at the time. The house was quiet in the way it usually was when everyone had settled into their routines. My husband was at work. My sister was upstairs, supposedly resting. I was alone in the kitchen, rinsing a cup that I had already cleaned once before, just to give my hands something to do. My sister had been living with us for 3 months. She came with one suitcase and a tired smile. She said she just needed time. I never asked how long. She was my sister. That was enough. She helped around the house. She cooked sometimes. She thanked me too often. I thought that meant gratitude. Now I know it meant something else. That afternoon, I went into the living room to open the windows. The air felt heavy. As I passed the couch, something caught my eye. A small thing. So small that I almost didn't stop. A scarf. It was folded neatly on the armrest, as if someone had placed it there with care. It wasn't mine. I knew every scarf I owned. This one was thin, soft, pale blue. Something about it felt too personal to be random. At first, I told myself it belonged to my sister. That was the easiest answer. She borrowed my things sometimes. She left things around. Nothing strange about that. Still, I picked it up. It smelled faintly of perfume. Not mine. Not the one my sister used either. This scent was lighter. Colder. It made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. I stood there longer than I should have, holding that scarf, feeling foolish for even thinking twice. Families live together. Things mix. I was tired. That had to be it. I folded it back the way I found it and placed it exactly where it was. I didn't want to seem dramatic, even to myself. A few minutes later, my sister came downstairs. She smiled when she saw me. The same gentle smile she always wore. She asked if I wanted tea. Her voice was soft, careful, almost practiced. I nodded. Even though I hadn't asked for anything, she moved around the kitchen like she belonged there. Like she had always lived with us. She laughed lightly at something on her phone and put it face down on the counter when she noticed me watching. "You okay?" she asked. I said yes. Too quickly, she poured the tea and slid the cup toward me. Her hand brushed mine. Just for a second. I remember that because it made me uncomfortable, and I didn't know why. We sat in silence. She talked about nothing. About a show she'd watched. About how grateful she was. About how lucky I was to have such a good husband. That last part stayed with me. When my husband came home that evening, he greeted us both the same way. A quick smile. A nod. Nothing unusual. He didn't look at the scarf. He didn't look at my sister any longer than normal. Dinner passed quietly. Too quietly. Later that night, when everyone had gone to bed, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I kept seeing that scarf in my mind. The way it didn't belong. The way my sister's voice softened when she spoke about my husband. I told myself to sleep. I told myself I was imagining things, but somewhere deep inside, a thought formed, slow and unwelcome. Something inside my house had shifted, and whatever it was, it didn't happen by accident. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm. The house was still dark, the kind of quiet that feels heavy instead of peaceful. I lay there for a while, listening. Not for anything specific. Just listening. As if my body expected to hear something my mind wasn't ready for. Beside me, my husband slept on his back, one arm thrown across the pillow like he always did. His breathing was steady. Normal. Too normal. I watched his face in the dim light and tried to recognize him. Tried to feel that familiar comfort. It didn't come. I got out of bed quietly and went to the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror longer than usual. Nothing looked different. I looked the same. The house looked the same. And yet, something felt wrong in a way I couldn't name. Downstairs, I found my sister already awake. She was sitting at the dining table with her phone and a cup of coffee, wearing one of my sweaters. She looked up and smiled when she saw me, like she had been waiting. "Good morning," she said softly. I said it back. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. She told me she couldn't sleep. That she felt anxious lately. That she hated being a burden. She said all the right words. The kind that make you feel guilty for ever doubting someone. I nodded. I told her she wasn't a burden. I told her she could stay as long as she needed. As I said it, A part of me wondered why I felt like I was convincing myself more than her. My husband came down a few minutes later. He looked surprised to see both of us awake. Not shocked. Just alert. His eyes moved between us quickly before he smiled. Didn't expect a morning meeting, he joked. My sister laughed. Too easily. He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter, close to her. Close enough that I noticed. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Kitchens are small. People stand close. Families do that. Still, when he reached for the sugar, his arm brushed hers. Neither of them moved away. I watched the moment stretch just a second too long. They both acted like nothing happened. Later, when my husband left for work, he kissed me on the forehead like he always did. Then he hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. Then he hugged my sister too. I'll see you later, he said to her. Not you both. Just you. I stood there after the door closed, feeling stupid for replaying it in my head. Feeling ashamed for questioning my own sister. My own marriage. I spent the day cleaning. Not because the house was dirty, but because I needed something to control. I rearranged drawers that didn't need rearranging. I folded laundry that was already folded. I avoided the living room, but the scarf stayed where it was. In the afternoon, I finally picked it up again. I told myself I would just ask her. Simple. Honest. Sisters talk. That's what we do. I found her in the guest room, sitting on the bed, scrolling through her phone. When she saw the scarf in my hand, something changed in her eyes. It was quick. So quick I almost missed it. Oh, that, she said lightly. It's mine. She didn't look at it when she said it. I asked her when she bought it. She paused, then shrugged. Said she didn't remember. Said it was old. Said she must have left it downstairs by accident. Her answers came too fast. Too smooth. I nodded and handed it back. I told her it was pretty. She smiled again. That soft, careful smile, but when I turned to leave, I felt it. Clearer than before. She was watching me. That night, I lay awake again, listening to the house breathe around me. Somewhere upstairs, a door creaked softly. Footsteps moved. Then stopped. I didn't get up. I didn't check. I stayed still, staring into the dark, finally admitting the truth to myself. Whatever was happening in my house wasn't just in my head anymore, and it wasn't going to stop on its own. The strange thing was that once I admitted something was wrong, my mind refused to let it go. Every small memory I had ignored before began to rise to the surface, slow and unwanted, like pieces of something broken floating back together. I started remembering how things were before my sister moved in. How quiet the house felt then. Not empty. Just calm. My husband and I had our routines. Dinner at the same time. Small conversations about work. Silence that felt safe. After she arrived, the silence changed. At first, I told myself it was temporary. Another person in the house would naturally change things. More noise. More movement. More life. That was what I said out loud, but deep inside, I knew it wasn't that simple. I remembered the first week she stayed with us. How she cried the first night. How she said she felt like a failure. I held her and promised she wasn't. I promised I'd always be there. I meant it. I also remembered how my husband stood in the doorway, watching us. Not uncomfortable. Not impatient. Just watching. At the time, I thought he was being kind. Supportive. Now, that memory felt different. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. How my sister knew when my husband was about to come home, even when his schedule changed. How she always seemed to be downstairs around that time, busy with something small. Cooking. Cleaning. Folding laundry that wasn't hers. I told myself she was just trying to help, but then there were the conversations. I would enter a room and they would go quiet. Not suddenly. Just subtly. Like a sentence had ended naturally, even though I hadn't heard the beginning. They would smile at me, and I would smile back, pretending not to feel that familiar tightening in my chest. One afternoon, I overheard them laughing together in the kitchen. Not loud laughter. Soft. Shared. The kind that comes from inside jokes. When I walked in, my sister stepped back immediately, as if she had crossed an invisible line. It's nothing, she said quickly. Just something silly. My husband avoided my eyes. That night, I asked him how his day was. He gave me a shorter answer than usual. He checked his phone twice while we talked. When I asked who was texting, he said it was work. I believed him. Or at least, I pretended to. The hardest part was the way my sister looked at me sometimes. Not often. Just when she thought I wasn't paying attention. There was something in her eyes then. Not guilt. Not fear. Something closer to confidence. I hated myself for thinking that. She was my sister. My blood. I had defended her to friends who warned me about letting someone stay too long. I told them family was different. Family wouldn't cross certain lines, but late at night, lying awake while the house settled into silence, I kept replaying one moment in my mind. A few days earlier, I had come home early from the store. I opened the front door quietly, my hands full of bags. From inside the house, I heard my sister's voice. Soft. Intimate. Saying my husband's name in a way I had never heard before. I stood there, frozen, listening. Then I heard my husband laugh. By the time I stepped inside, they were standing far apart, pretending to talk about nothing. I told myself I had imagined the tone of her voice. That I was tired. That stress was playing tricks on me. Now I wasn't so sure. That evening, after everyone went to bed, I walked through the house alone. I stood in the living room and looked at the couch. The armrest where the scarf had been folded so neatly. I realized something then that made my stomach drop. That scarf hadn't been left there carelessly. It had been placed. Someone wanted it there, and for the first time, I understood that whatever was happening between my husband and my sister wasn't accidental. It was careful. It was quiet, and it was happening right in front of me. After that realization, something inside me changed. Not in a dramatic way. There was no panic, no tears, no sudden urge to confront anyone. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. It felt unnatural, like the quiet that comes just before a storm. I stopped asking questions. I stopped filling the silence. I started watching. It was amazing how much people revealed when they thought they were safe. I noticed how my sister adjusted her schedule without ever saying it out loud. She woke up earlier now. She made sure she was dressed before my husband came downstairs. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing obvious. Just enough effort to be noticed. She laughed more around him. Not loud laughter. Soft, controlled laughter. The kind that invites someone closer. When he spoke, she listened like every word mattered. When I spoke, she nodded politely and then looked away. My husband changed too. He stopped complaining about work. He stopped telling me small details about his day. Instead, he shared those things with her. I would walk into a room and hear him mid-sentence, explaining something he used to explain only to me. When he saw me, he would pause, then continue as if nothing had changed. I began to understand something painful. They weren't hiding all the time. They were hiding selectively. At dinner, my sister always sat across from him. She said it was because the chair was more comfortable. I didn't argue. I watched how their eyes met briefly and then moved away. How their hands never touched, yet somehow stayed close enough to feel each other. Once, I left the room to answer a phone call. When I came back, their voices dropped. Not suddenly. Just enough. As if they had trained themselves to do it naturally. I stopped pretending not to notice. One evening, I decided to test something. I told them I'd be out late the next day. I said it casually, like it didn't matter. My sister looked up too quickly. My husband nodded, but his jaw tightened. The next day, I came home earlier than I said I would. The house was quiet when I opened the door. Too quiet. I stood still and listened. From upstairs, I heard movement. A door closing softly. Then footsteps, slow and careful. When my sister came down, she looked surprised to see me. Just for a moment. "Oh, you're home already," she said. I smiled and said my plans changed. My husband appeared a few minutes later. He avoided looking at me. He went straight to the kitchen and started talking about something unimportant. His voice sounded forced. I didn't ask where he'd been. I didn't ask why my sister's hair was still slightly damp, as if she had just washed it. I said nothing. That night, I lay awake again, but this time I wasn't confused. I wasn't searching for answers. I was counting patterns. Timing. Reactions. The way my sister's door creaked when it opened. The way my husband's phone lit up in the dark. At some point, I realized something else. They thought I was blind. They thought my silence meant ignorance. They thought kindness meant weakness. I started keeping small notes in my head. Not written, just remembered. Who entered which room? How long someone stayed? Who avoided eye contact afterward? I wasn't trying to prove anything yet. I was learning, and the more I watched, the clearer it became that this wasn't just emotional closeness. This wasn't confusion or comfort or loneliness. This was coordination. Whatever they were doing it carefully, slowly, with intention, and they were doing it inside my home, the place I had opened without hesitation, the place I had shared without fear. As I lay there in the dark, listening to the house settle around me, one thought settled just as firmly. If they were planning something, they had already decided where I fit into it, and it wasn't beside them. The first clear lie didn't arrive with drama. It didn't come with raised voices or panic. It came quietly, almost politely, which somehow made it worse. It happened over something so small that, on any other day, I would have forgotten it within minutes. That morning, my husband said he had an early meeting. He mentioned it while tying his shoes, his back half turned toward me. His voice was casual, practiced. He said he wouldn't be home for lunch. Maybe late dinner too. I nodded. I didn't question it. I wished him luck and watched him leave like I always did. A few minutes later, my sister came downstairs. She was dressed already. Not in her usual relaxed clothes, but in something more careful. Her hair was done. Light makeup. Nothing obvious. Just intentional. She said she was going out too. Said she needed to run errands. She didn't say where. She didn't need to. She smiled at me, thanked me again for letting her stay, and picked up her bag. The door closed behind her. I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the empty space they had left behind. Something about the timing felt wrong. Too aligned. Too smooth. I told myself to stop. I told myself not everything was connected, but my body didn't listen. Around noon, I realized I had left my phone charger in the car. I decided to drive to the nearby store to pick up a spare. It was nothing urgent. Just something to get me out of the house. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw his car. At first, my brain refused to accept it. I slowed down, blinking, telling myself it must look similar. But I knew his car. I had sat in that passenger seat for years. It was his, parked near the entrance. Engine still warm. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. I sat there longer than I should have, staring through the windshield, hoping someone else would walk out and prove me wrong. No one did. I didn't go inside. I didn't confront him. I didn't even get out of the car. I just drove away. By the time I got home, my heart felt heavy but strangely steady. Like something had finally clicked into place. That evening, my husband came home late, just like he said he would. He kissed my cheek and apologized. Said the meeting ran longer than expected. Said traffic was terrible. I asked him where it was. He named a place across town. It wasn't near the store. I nodded. I didn't correct him. I didn't mention the car. I didn't change my expression. Across the table, my sister ate quietly. She barely spoke. When she did, she avoided looking at me. Her fork tapped against her plate once, then stopped. After dinner, I went to the living room and sat on the couch. The same couch. The same armrest where the scarf had once been folded so carefully. My husband joined me. He talked about his day. The meeting. The people. The problems. His story flowed easily. Too easily. I watched his face as he spoke. I looked for hesitation. For guilt. For cracks. There were none. Later that night, when the house was quiet again, I replayed the day in my mind. Every word. Every glance. Every pause. The lie was small. Unnecessary. He could have told me anything else. He could have said he was out with friends. He could have said he needed space. Instead, he chose a lie that required precision. That was what frightened me. People don't lie carefully unless they're protecting something. Or someone. As I lay in bed, staring into the darkness, I understood something that left me cold. This wasn't confusion anymore. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was a choice, and both of them were making it. After that day, the house no longer felt like a place I lived in. It felt like a place I was studying. Every room carried a different weight now. Every sound meant something. Every silence meant more. I didn't rush into anything. I didn't search phones or ask questions. I knew better than that. Whatever they were doing had been built slowly. Carelessly confronting it would only teach them to hide it better. So I let things continue. A few days later, I noticed something that should have been harmless. My sister started doing laundry more often. Not just her clothes. Mine too. She said she wanted to help. She said it made her feel useful. I thanked her. One afternoon, while she was out, I went to put away the folded clothes she had left on the couch. That's when I noticed it. One of my shirts smelled wrong, not dirty. Not washed badly. Just different. That same faint, cold perfume. The one I had smelled on the scarf. The one that didn't belong to either of us. I held the fabric close, my chest tightening as the connection formed fully this time. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't carelessness. Someone had worn it. I folded the shirt carefully and placed it back where it was. I didn't want anything to look disturbed. I didn't want anyone to know what I had noticed. That evening, my sister mentioned how comfortable my clothes were. She said it casually, like a compliment. She said she hoped I didn't mind her borrowing them. I smiled and told her it was fine. Across the room, my husband looked up for just a second. Our eyes met. He looked away immediately. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, I went into the laundry room alone. I checked the machine, the detergent, the basket. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Then I noticed something else. A sock, not mine. Not my husband's. Smaller. Thinner. Pale gray. Something my sister didn't own either. I had folded her clothes enough times to know. I stood there holding that sock, my thoughts moving slowly, carefully, as if I were handling something fragile. I traced where it could have come from. When it could have been washed. Why it had been hidden among our things. The answer came quietly. It had been placed there to blend in, just like the scarf, just like the shirt. Someone wasn't just careless. Someone was moving comfortably through my life. Wearing my things. Using my space. Leaving pieces behind without fear. The next morning, I watched my sister more closely. I noticed how she touched her hair when my husband entered the room. How she lowered her voice when she spoke to him. How she never did either of those things around me. I noticed how my husband had stopped touching me altogether. No casual hand on my back. No absent-minded gestures. Nothing. It hadn't happened suddenly. That was the cruelest part. It had faded while I wasn't paying attention. One evening, while setting the table, I heard laughter upstairs. I froze, listening. It wasn't loud. It wasn't hidden. It was relaxed. Familiar. I realized then that they weren't afraid of being caught. They were afraid of being interrupted. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to doors open and close softly. I counted footsteps. I measured time. At some point, my sister's door opened. A few minutes later, my husband's side of the bed went cold. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I stared into the darkness, finally understanding something that made my stomach twist. They weren't sneaking around. They were living, and I was the only one pretending not to see it. By the time I accepted what was happening, my sister had already started taking my place in ways so quiet they almost felt respectful. She didn't rush it. She didn't announce it. She eased into it, like someone slipping into a familiar role they had been rehearsing for a long time. She learned my routines better than I knew them myself. She woke up when I used to wake up. She made breakfast the way my husband liked it, even though I had never taught her how. When I changed brands at the store, she noticed. When I stopped buying something, she replaced it without asking. At first, I told myself this was kindness. Help. Gratitude. But kindness doesn't erase someone else. One evening, I came home later than usual. As I stepped inside, I smelled food cooking. Not just any food. A dish I used to make on special days. Not often. Not casually. I stood in the doorway longer than I should have, listening. My sister was in the kitchen. My husband stood beside her, leaning against the counter. They were close. Not touching. But close enough that space didn't exist between them. She was explaining something to him, smiling softly. He nodded, watching her hands as she spoke. When she laughed, he laughed too. Not politely. Naturally. I cleared my throat. They both turned toward me at the same time. "Oh, you're home," my sister said, a hint of surprise in her voice. Then she smiled. "I thought I'd cook tonight." "I hope that's okay." I said it was fine. My husband kissed my cheek. It felt automatic, like a habit he hadn't questioned yet. Then he went back to the counter, back to her. During dinner, they talked to each other more than they talked to me. Not openly, just subtly. A look here, a comment there, a shared understanding that didn't include me. I sat there, nodding, responding when spoken to, feeling like a guest at my own table. After dinner, my sister cleaned up without being asked. She told me to rest. Said I worked too hard. Said she had time. My husband agreed. That was when I realized something painful. They weren't just crossing lines, they were building a new normal. A few days later, I overheard my sister on the phone. She didn't know I was home. She stood near the window, her back to the hallway. "I know," she said softly. "It's complicated. But it won't be for long." I waited for her to mention my name. She didn't. When she hung up and turned around, she jumped slightly when she saw me. Then she smiled, too quickly. "Who was that?" I asked. "A friend," she said. "Just checking on me." I nodded. That night, I went into the guest room while she was out. I told myself I was just looking for an extra blanket. I didn't touch anything at first. I just looked. Her suitcase was still there, half unpacked, like she hadn't planned to leave anytime soon. In the closet, I noticed something hanging carefully among her clothes. One of my dresses, not borrowed, not wrinkled, hung neatly, as if it belonged there. I closed the closet door slowly. In that moment, something hardened inside me. A quiet resolve. A clarity I hadn't felt before. She wasn't staying with me. She was settling in, and my husband wasn't confused or tempted or weak. He was complicit. Later that night, lying beside him, I felt the distance more clearly than ever. He turned away from me in his sleep, his back familiar but unreachable. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked softly. I didn't move. I didn't react. I understood now that whatever this was, it had moved past secrecy. They weren't hiding anymore. They were preparing. Once I saw it clearly, I couldn't unsee it. The way my sister moved through the house changed in my eyes. Every step felt deliberate now. Every word felt chosen. She wasn't just being careful. She was performing. She became softer around my husband. Quieter. More understanding. When he spoke, she listened like his words carried weight. When I spoke, she listened politely, then moved on. It was subtle. Enough that no one would call it disrespect. Enough that I would feel it anyway. One afternoon, my husband came home earlier than usual. I was in the bedroom, folding clothes. I heard their voices downstairs. Not loud. Comfortable. I stayed where I was, holding a shirt I had folded 1,000 times before. My sister was telling him about her day. Not complaining. Not asking for sympathy. Just sharing small details. The kind of details people share when they expect someone to care. He responded without hesitation. He asked questions. Followed up. Laughed at the right moments. I realized then that he hadn't asked me about my day in weeks. When I came downstairs, they stopped talking. Not abruptly. Just enough. Like the end of a conversation that didn't include me. My sister smiled. We were just talking about nothing. Nothing had never sounded so full. Over the next few days, I noticed how my sister positioned herself. Always nearby, but never in the way. Always helpful, but never intrusive. She knew when to leave the room. She knew when to stay. She knew how to make herself indispensable without appearing demanding. I started to understand something unsettling. She wasn't improvising. She had studied this point one evening, while we were all watching television. My sister sat on the floor instead of the couch. She leaned back against it, close to where my husband sat. Too close. Her head rested lightly against the cushion near his leg. Not touching him. Not directly. I waited for him to move. He didn't. I shifted slightly on the couch. Neither of them noticed. Later that night, my sister knocked on my bedroom door. She came in slowly, sat at the edge of the bed, and told me she felt guilty. She said she worried she was overstaying her welcome. She said she didn't want to come between my husband and me. The words were perfect. Too perfect. I reassured her. I told her she was family. I told her she could stay as long as she needed. As I spoke, she watched my face closely, like she was checking something off a list. When she left, I lay awake thinking about that conversation. About how she had brought up my marriage without being asked. About how she framed herself as a potential problem while pretending to fear becoming one. That was when it hit me. She wasn't just hiding an affair, she was rewriting the story. The next morning, I found my husband in the kitchen, staring at his phone. When I asked what was wrong, he hesitated before answering. Said he was just tired. Said work was stressful. A moment later, my sister entered the room. His posture changed instantly. He put the phone away. He smiled. "You okay?" She asked him. He nodded. "Yeah, just a long week." She touched his arm. Briefly. Comfortingly. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. I watched them, standing just a few feet away, and understood something that made my stomach turn. She wasn't trying to take him from me anymore. She already believed he was hers. And the worst part was this. He was letting her. By then, I had stopped hoping I was wrong. Hope requires uncertainty, and I no longer had any. What I had instead was a growing list in my head. Not written. Just quietly stored. Dates. Times. Changes. Small details that, on their own, meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore anymore. It started with money. At first, it was subtle. A bill paid later than usual. A transfer I didn't recognize. I asked my husband about it casually, the way you ask about weather or traffic. He didn't hesitate. He gave me an answer immediately. Too immediately. He said it was for work. Some temporary issue. Something he'd already handled. I accepted it. Out loud, inside, I noted it. A few days later, I noticed groceries I hadn't bought. Brands I never chose. Items I didn't like. When I asked my sister about it, she smiled and said she thought we should try something new. She said she was just being helpful. Helpful had become her favorite word. Then there were the evenings. My husband started coming home later again, but not always. His schedule became unpredictable in a way that felt intentional. On nights he was late, my sister stayed up with him. On nights he came home early, she somehow always seemed to be awake. 2.1 afternoon. While putting away mail, I noticed an envelope addressed to him. It wasn't from work. It wasn't urgent. It was from the bank. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The return address was enough to tell me something had changed. That night, while they sat together in the living room, talking softly, I went upstairs and checked the guest room again. I wasn't searching blindly anymore. I knew what I was looking for. I in the drawer of the bedside table, beneath neatly folded socks, I found a small notebook. Plain. Unmarked. I opened it slowly. Inside were dates. Short notes. Numbers. Amounts. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then it clicked. Expenses, not random. Planned. Some of the notes were written in my husband's handwriting. Others in my sister's. They were careful. Organized. Confident. I closed the notebook and put it back exactly where it was. My hands were steady. My breathing was not. Downstairs, I could hear them laughing. I stood there for a moment, listening, feeling something shift permanently inside me. They weren't just betraying me emotionally, they were preparing for a future that didn't include me. Over the next week, I paid closer attention to how decisions were being made. My husband started discussing things with my sister before mentioning them to me. Small things. Repairs. Plans. Purchases. Always framed as casual conversations. Always after the fact, she would say, "We were just talking about it earlier," as if that explained everything. I noticed how often my name was left out of sentences. How plans were made assuming my agreement. How my presence felt more like a formality than a necessity. One night, while clearing the table, I heard my sister say something that made my hands go cold. "We should probably do it soon," she said quietly. My husband didn't ask what she meant. He just nodded. I waited for them to notice me standing there. They didn't. Later, alone in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. I thought about all the times I had protected her, defended her, Given her space in my life, without question, I thought about how easily she had stepped into my place, and I realized something that felt heavier than everything else combined. This wasn't just about desire or loneliness. This was strategy. They weren't reacting to circumstances, they were creating them, and whatever they were planning, it had a timeline point one I was never meant to see coming. The night everything changed didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly, disguised as an ordinary evening, the kind that slips by unnoticed until you realize later it was never ordinary at all. It started with dinner. Simple. Quiet. My sister cooked again. She served my husband first, like it was instinct. I watched him thank her, watched the familiarity settle between them like something permanent. No one mentioned the tension. No one mentioned the silence. We ate like a family that still believed in its own story. Afterward, my husband said he had a call to take. He grabbed his phone and went upstairs. My sister lingered in the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already clean. She hummed softly, not nervous, not rushed. I told her I was going to bed early. She nodded, her back still turned. Of course, she said. You look tired. I went upstairs, but I didn't go to bed. I turned off the bedroom light and sat in the dark listening. The house had its own rhythm at night. Pipes clicking. The refrigerator humming. Familiar sounds that used to comfort me. A few minutes passed. Then more. I heard my husband's voice through the wall. Low. Soft. Not the voice he used for work calls. Not the one he used with me anymore. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. The tone told me everything. Then I heard another sound. A door opening. Not my door. I held my breath without realizing it. Footsteps moved down the hallway. Slow. Careful. Someone paused. Then another door opened and closed just as softly. Time stretched in a way that felt unreal. I counted seconds. I counted my own breaths. My heart beat so loudly I was sure it would give me away. I stood up quietly and walked to the bedroom door. I opened it just enough to see the hallway. The light under my sister's door was on. My husband's door was open. His room was empty. I stood there, staring at that open door, feeling the last piece of doubt fall away. There was no confusion left. No room for excuses. No space for misunderstanding. I went back into my room and sat on the bed. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't shake. I felt something colder than all of that. Clarity. Minutes passed. Then more. I imagined them together on the other side of the wall. The whispers. The familiarity. The comfort they had built right under my roof. At some point, footsteps returned to the hallway. My sister's door opened. Then my husband's door closed. Everything reset. The house returned to silence. The next morning, they acted normal. Too normal. My sister greeted me with her usual gentle smile. My husband kissed my forehead like it was routine. No guilt. No tension. No fear. That was when I understood something that made my stomach tighten. They believed they were safe. They believed I had seen nothing. They believed the hardest part was over. I watched them move around the kitchen, exchanging looks they thought I couldn't read. And I made a quiet decision. I wouldn't confront them. Not yet, because now I didn't just suspect the truth. I had witnessed it, and from that moment on, everything changed. After that night, I moved through my days like someone who had stepped out of her own life and into a parallel version of it. Everything looked the same. The same walls. The same furniture. The same faces. But the meaning behind every movement had shifted. I started paying attention to time, not just hours, but patterns. When my sister showered. When my husband checked his phone. How long doors stayed closed. How often excuses were reused. I didn't need proof anymore. I needed understanding. It didn't take long. Their routine was careful, but not perfect. It relied on my silence. On my predictability. On the version of me they thought they knew. My sister became more relaxed. She stopped pretending to feel guilty. She walked through the house with confidence now, like someone who knew she belonged. She rearranged things without asking. She replaced items quietly. She stopped thanking me. My husband started planning in front of her, not openly. But enough. I noticed him lowering his voice when he talked about money. I noticed how she listened closely, nodding, offering suggestions. They spoke like partners. Not lovers hiding something forbidden, partners building something. One evening, while my husband was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I wasn't searching. I wasn't snooping. I was already standing there, folding laundry, when the screen lit up. A name appeared, not hers, something saved carefully. Something disguised. The message preview was short. Practical. Cold, tomorrow works. Papers ready. My chest tightened, but my hands didn't shake. I folded the last shirt and placed it neatly on the bed. I left the phone exactly where it was, downstairs. My sister was on the laptop. She closed it quickly when I entered the room, smiling like she had been caught doing something harmless. Just looking at job listings, she said. I nodded. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed conversations from months ago. Comments that felt insignificant then. How my husband once said it might be smart to simplify things. How my sister had agreed too quickly. Simplify. The word echoed. The next morning, I found an envelope tucked between old documents in the drawer where we kept important papers. It wasn't sealed. It didn't need to be. I recognized the heading instantly. Legal language. Carefully printed. Neatly organized. I didn't read every word. I didn't have to. I saw my name. I saw dates. I saw terms that didn't include me. This wasn't recent. This had been prepared. I put the envelope back where it was and closed the drawer gently. My reflection stared back at me from the mirror on the wall. I looked calm, composed, like someone who hadn't just discovered her life had been quietly rewritten. Downstairs, I heard my sister laugh. My husband laughed too. It sounded easy, unburdened. That was when I understood the most painful truth so far. They hadn't just betrayed me, they had planned around me. Every kindness my sister showed. Every small withdrawal from my husband. Every gentle excuse. It had all been part of a longer game, and the worst part was this. They thought I would never notice. They thought I would accept whatever ending they handed me. As I stood there, listening to them talk about the future like it belonged to them alone, I made another decision. I would let them believe that, because the moment someone thinks they've already won is the moment they stop watching, and I was done being the only one in the dark. Once I knew it had been planned, I started seeing everyone differently. Not just my husband. Not just my sister. Everyone around them suddenly felt like a possible witness. Or worse, a participant. It began with small comments. Innocent ones. Words that slipped too easily out of people's mouths. One afternoon, my husband's mother called. She asked how we were doing. Her voice lingered strangely on the word. She said my sister sounded happier lately. Healthier. More settled. I told her she was doing better. I didn't tell her why. That sentence made my stomach tighten. Before hanging up, she added, almost casually, it's good she has support now. Support, not from me. She didn't say my name. A few days later, an old friend stopped by. Someone who hadn't visited in months. She hugged my sister first. Held her a little longer than necessary. When she hugged me, her arms felt lighter. Distracted. We sat together in the living room. Conversation moved easily around me, like water flowing around a stone. My friend mentioned how difficult it must be for my sister to start over. She said she admired how strong my husband had been through all of it. All of what? I smiled. I nodded. I asked neutral questions. I watched their faces carefully as they answered. There it was again. That look. The one people give when they think they're being discreet, but aren't. Later that evening, I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the sink, replaying every interaction from the past few weeks. The sudden check-ins. The subtle concern. The strange sympathy that no one had ever shown me before. It wasn't random. They had been told something, not the truth. Not fully, but enough to frame me as difficult, or distant, or unstable. Enough to explain my sister's presence. Enough to justify what was coming. I thought back to conversations I'd had months ago. Times my husband had spoken on my behalf. Times my sister had answered questions meant for me. I had let it happen without thinking twice. I had trusted them. That night, I heard my sister on the phone again. This time, I didn't hide. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening openly. She's fine, my sister said softly. She doesn't suspect anything. She's always been calm. There was a pause. No, she continued. We've been careful. Everyone understands. Everyone. The word echoed in my mind long after she hung up. When I went back to my room, I realized how isolated I had become without noticing it. How quietly my support system had shifted away from me. How often I had defended people who were no longer on my side. This wasn't just betrayal between three people. It was a narrative point one they had been feeding to others slowly, gently, convincingly. I remembered all the times I had stayed silent to keep the peace. All the times I had chosen understanding over confrontation. All the times I had assumed love meant patience. They had used that against me, but what they didn't know is this. Silence doesn't always mean ignorance. Sometimes it means observation, and now that I knew how many people were standing just outside my story, waiting for its ending, I understood something vital. If this was going to end, it couldn't end quietly, because too many people had already chosen sides. By then, the house felt crowded even when no one was speaking. The walls held too many secrets. Every room felt like it had witnessed something I hadn't been invited to see. I moved through it carefully, like someone walking through a place that could collapse if stepped on too hard. The plan revealed itself slowly. Not in one clear moment, but in fragments. A sentence here. A document there. A look exchanged that lasted half a second too long. One evening, my husband mentioned selling the car. He said it casually, like it was a passing thought. He said we didn't really need it anymore. He said it would simplify things. I asked when he started thinking about that. He shrugged. Just recently. My sister nodded from across the room, as if she'd been part of the thought. It makes sense, she said. You've been stressed. Stressed. I realized then that decisions about my life were being discussed without me. Not argued. Not debated. Simply decided. A few days later, I noticed folders on the dining table. I didn't touch them. I didn't need to. The labels were clear enough. Property. Accounts. Adjustments. The language was neutral. Clean. Like nothing emotional had ever lived between those pages. That night, I lay awake thinking about how carefully they were dismantling me. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Just efficiently. They weren't planning to fight me. They were planning to outgrow me. The next morning, my sister suggested I take some time for myself. She said I seemed tired. Said it might be good for me to step back for a while. Maybe visit someone. Maybe rest. My husband agreed immediately. You've been doing a lot, he said gently. You deserve a break. I smiled and thanked them. Inside, something snapped into place. They weren't just rearranging assets. They were rearranging perception. Preparing a version of events where my absence would seem reasonable. Necessary. Even kind. I started noticing how often my sister positioned herself beside my husband when decisions were discussed. How naturally she spoke for him. How easily he let her. I noticed how often my name was followed by concern. How often my actions were described instead of my intentions. She doesn't mean it like that, my sister said once, smiling. She just gets overwhelmed. I was standing right there. I began to understand the real plan then. They weren't trying to replace me overnight. They were creating a transition. A gentle one. One where everyone would nod sympathetically and agree it was for the best. For me, that realization hurt more than the affair itself. Betrayal is sharp. This was dull. Slow. Designed to make me disappear without resistance. One afternoon, while my husband was out, I found my sister in the living room going through papers. She froze when she saw me. Then she smiled, like always. Oh, she said. I was just organizing. I looked at the papers in her hands. My name was printed there. She followed my gaze and closed the folder calmly. Don't worry, she said softly. It's nothing you need to stress about. That was the moment I understood how little they feared me. They thought I was already gone. That night, I sat alone in the bedroom and replayed everything. Every kindness I had offered. Every boundary I had softened. Every time I had chosen trust over instinct. I didn't feel angry. I felt focused, because now I knew exactly what they were trying to do, and knowing the plan meant I could change it, quietly, carefully, before they realized I was still very much here. The truth I didn't expect came from the one place I had stopped looking. Not a document. Not a message. Not a whispered conversation behind a door. It came from a memory I had buried because it felt too uncomfortable to examine. It happened late one afternoon when my sister and I were alone in the house. My husband was out. The quiet felt different that day. Heavy but exposed. Like there was nothing left to hide. She was in the kitchen, cutting vegetables slowly, carefully. I watched her from the doorway. For the first time, I didn't see my sister. I saw a stranger wearing her face. She broke the silence first. "You've always had everything," she said lightly, not looking at me. I waited. The house. The marriage. The stability, she continued. "It just happened for you." Her tone wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was reflective. Like she was stating a fact. I asked her what she meant. She finally looked at me then. Her eyes were calm. Almost kind. "You don't even realize how easy your life has been." That was when it clicked. This wasn't about desire. Or loneliness. Or love. This was resentment. She started talking then. Slowly at first. About how she always lived in my shadow. How people compared us. How I was the responsible one. The settled one. The one who was trusted. "I just wanted something that felt like mine," she said. I stood there, listening, feeling something sink deep into my chest. She wasn't confessing. She was justifying. She talked about my husband like he was a prize she had earned through patience. Through understanding. Through being there when I wasn't. She spoke about him with ownership, not affection, and then she said something that changed everything. "He was already unhappy," she said softly. "I didn't take him from you. I just gave him another option." I realized then how carefully she had rewritten the story in her own mind. How she had removed herself from guilt by framing it as inevitability. How she had convinced herself that what she was doing was fair. I asked her how long. She smiled faintly. "Longer than you think." That was when the final piece fell into place. This hadn't started when she moved in. That was just when it became convenient. They had been building this quietly, patiently, long before I ever opened my door to her. The financial planning. The narrative. The concern about my well-being. The gentle push toward my disappearance. The house wasn't the beginning. It was the stage. She finished cutting the vegetables and placed them neatly on a plate, like nothing significant had just been said. She told me dinner would be ready soon. I walked away without another word. I in my room. I sat on the bed and stared at the wall. My hands felt numb. My thoughts were clear. The most shocking betrayal wasn't that my sister slept with my husband. It was that she believed she deserved my life, and my husband believed she could have it. They hadn't just crossed a line. They had erased me in their minds long before they tried to erase me in reality, and in that moment, I understood something that gave me strength instead of fear. They thought the story was already written. They thought I was the quiet character who fades out in the middle. They were wrong. By the 15th week, I felt a shift within myself. The constant pressure, criticism, and manipulation from Margaret had hardened my resolve. I was no longer merely surviving in the household. I was preparing to act, patiently gathering evidence while maintaining the appearance of the quiet, obedient daughter-in-law. Each insult she hurled, each manipulation aimed at Daniel, only strengthened my determination. I had learned to endure, observe, and analyze. It was during this week that Aaron unexpectedly appeared at our home, not in secret, but at the front door. My heart raced. Margaret's composure wavered for the first time in weeks. He introduced himself calmly, but the tension between him and Margaret was unmistakable. I learned that he was, in fact, her son from a previous marriage, a truth Margaret had guarded for decades. His presence explained everything: the secrecy, the hidden documents, the whispered phone calls, and her insistence that Daniel never find out. Aaron pulled me aside privately later that evening. His tone was serious, almost urgent. "Emily, she'll ruin your future if you don't stop her," he warned. My mind raced. I had expected confrontation, but not assistance from the person at the heart of Margaret's secrecy. He explained that Margaret had been using Daniel's identity to conduct illegal property deals in order to protect Aaron, shielding him from exposure and potential danger. The web of lies and control suddenly made sense. Though the danger remained real, I spent that night reflecting on everything I had observed over the past weeks: the envelopes of cash, the late night phone calls, Margaret's manipulations of Daniel and me, and now the shocking revelation of Aaron's existence and the illegal dealings. Each moment of cruelty and secrecy had been a piece of a puzzle I was finally beginning to see in full. The fear and tension I had felt were replaced by a clear sense of purpose. I understood what I needed to do, and the path forward became evident. From that point on, I acted with careful strategy. I maintained my calm demeanor, pretending to be the same obedient, overworked Emily, all the while collecting evidence, recording phone calls, photographing documents, and documenting hidden messages. Margaret's overconfidence made her blind to my quiet observation. She believed she still controlled the household, but I was slowly turning the tables, preparing for a moment of revelation that would expose the truth in its entirety. By the end of the week, I felt a profound transformation. I was no longer a passive victim of Margaret's cruelty. I had become vigilant, intelligent, and methodical. The turning point had arrived, not through confrontation or anger, but through knowledge and preparation. The secret of Aaron, Margaret's manipulations, and the illegal dealings would not remain hidden. I was ready to take control, and when the time came, Margaret's carefully guarded world would be exposed, and justice would quietly but powerfully prevail. By the 16th week, I had fully embraced my role as a careful observer and strategist. Margaret's sharp tongue and constant manipulation no longer intimidated me. Instead, I had learned to use her overconfidence against her, pretending to be the obedient, timid daughter-in-law while quietly gathering every piece of evidence that would one day expose her secret. Each day, I cataloged her actions, the late-night calls, the hidden envelopes, and Aaron's clandestine meetings with her. Aaron and I began to communicate more openly, though cautiously. He explained the full extent of Margaret's secret. Her illegal property deals, conducted under Daniel's name, were all to protect him, her hidden son from a previous marriage. Margaret had built a wall of deception around him for decades, manipulating everyone in the household to ensure that no one discovered the truth. Aaron's warnings weighed heavily on me. If she continues unchecked, your future could be ruined, Emily. You have to be careful but vigilant. I realized that my previous strategy of silent observation was no longer enough. I needed to be more deliberate. I began recording phone conversations whenever Margaret made suspicious calls, photographing documents she tried to hide, and noting every interaction with Aaron. I maintained a careful balance, pretending to remain overwhelmed and meek while steadily building a collection of proof. Margaret's overconfidence made her blind to the fact that I was preparing quietly, meticulously, for the right moment. Home, Margaret's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She was tense, her movements sharp, and her eyes darted nervously more often. She continued to blame me for minor mistakes, subtly undermined Daniel, and tried to maintain her illusion of control. But I could sense the cracks forming. Her obsession with secrecy and protection of Aaron had consumed her, and she underestimated the quiet strength I had been cultivating. By the end of the week, I had a clear plan. I would remain patient, careful, and methodical. I would continue to observe, gather evidence, and wait for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. Margaret's manipulations, the illegal dealings, and the hidden existence of Aaron would be exposed, not through confrontation, but through undeniable proof. I felt a sense of calm determination settle over me. I was no longer the timid, overworked Emily. I was vigilant, prepared, and ready. The turning point had arrived, and the household's hidden truths were about to be brought into the light. Letting them think they had won was the hardest part. Not because it hurt my pride, but because it required patience in moments where instinct begged me to speak, to correct, to defend myself. I learned to ignore that instinct. I played the role they expected. I became quieter. Not withdrawn, just agreeable. I stopped initiating conversations about us. I stopped asking where my husband was going or when he'd be back. I stopped reacting when my sister made decisions without consulting me. I became easy. They mistook that for weakness. My sister grew bold in ways she didn't even try to hide anymore. She talked openly about improvements to the house, about how things could be arranged better. She used the word "we" often, and each time she did, she looked at my husband, not me. He didn't correct her. I noticed how they shared glances now. Not quick ones. Lingering ones. The kind that come from certainty. From believing no one is watching closely anymore. One evening, my husband mentioned a small trip. Just a few days. He said it would be good for everyone. A change of scenery. He said it without meeting my eyes. My sister smiled immediately. That sounds nice, she said. You deserve it. I agreed. I watched the relief wash over his face. I watched how easily they accepted my agreement. How little they questioned it. They were so sure I was already stepping aside. That night, they stayed up late together. I went to bed early on purpose. I let them have the house. I let them think they were alone. I lay there in the dark, listening to laughter drift through the walls, feeling strangely detached from it. It didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like distance. Over the next few days, I became almost invisible. I left before they woke up. I came home after dinner. I answered messages briefly, kindly, without emotion. I let them settle deeper into their comfort. That comfort changed them. My husband started speaking carelessly. He talked about timelines, about paperwork, about after things are done. He assumed I wouldn't challenge him. He assumed I wouldn't understand. My sister started acting like the house already belonged to her. She moved my things without asking. She placed her own things in shared spaces. She stopped pretending she was temporary. One afternoon, I overheard them in the kitchen. I wasn't hiding. I was just quiet. She's taking it well, my sister said. Better than I expected. She always does, my husband replied. She doesn't like conflict. They laughed softly. I stood there, unseen, absorbing the truth of how they saw me. Not as a person. Not as someone capable of resistance. Just as an obstacle that had already been cleared. That night, my sister knocked on my door. She sat on the edge of my bed again, like she had weeks before. She asked how I was feeling. She said she hoped I wasn't overwhelmed. I told her I was fine. She studied my face closely, searching for something. When she didn't find it, she relaxed. You're handling this really well, she said. I thanked her. When she left, I sat in the dark for a long time. Not thinking about what they had taken from me, but about what they had given me without realizing it. Time, space, freedom to move without suspicion. They thought the quiet meant acceptance. They thought the calm meant closure. They didn't realize that the moment someone stops fighting back is often the moment they start planning their exit, and mine was already underway. The exposure didn't happen the way people imagine it does. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no dramatic confrontation where everything spilled out at once. That kind of ending would have been too easy for them. I wanted something they couldn't dismiss. I chose the timing carefully. It was a family gathering. Nothing formal. Just a dinner planned weeks in advance. One of those occasions everyone attends out of habit. My husband suggested we host it. My sister agreed immediately. They both looked at me, waiting. I smiled and said yes. The house filled slowly that evening. Familiar faces. Comfortable laughter. Conversations layered over each other. My sister moved through the rooms like she belonged there. My husband stayed close to her. Not touching. Not hiding either. No one noticed. Or maybe they didn't want it. I waited. After dinner, when everyone had settled into the living room, when glasses were half empty and people were relaxed enough to stop guarding their reactions, I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I spoke calmly, like I was sharing something ordinary. I said there had been a misunderstanding lately, that I wanted to clear it up. I said I'd noticed some confusion about roles, about plans, about who was responsible for what. The room quieted. Slowly, I looked at my sister first. Then my husband. I watched them tense without knowing why. I started with facts, not feelings. I talked about dates. About decisions made without me. About documents prepared quietly. I didn't name betrayal yet. I didn't need to. I let the shape of it form on its own. I mentioned conversations people had been having around me, assuming I wasn't listening. I repeated phrases word for word. I watched faces change as recognition settled in. Then I said it. I said my sister and my husband had been planning a future together. Silence followed. Thick. Heavy. Someone laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. I didn't smile. I didn't look away. I continued. I described the night I heard doors open and close. The way routines had shifted. The way plans had been made as if I were already gone. I didn't embellish. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't need to. My sister tried to interrupt. I raised my hand slightly. Just enough. I said I had no interest in arguing. I said I wasn't asking anyone to choose sides. I said I only wanted the truth to exist in the open, where it belonged. My husband stood up then. He tried to speak. He stumbled over words. He said things had been complicated. That no one meant to hurt anyone. I asked him one question. How long? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The room understood. My sister's face went pale. Not with guilt. With fear. She hadn't planned for this. She hadn't planned for clarity. She had planned for quiet removal. That was the difference. I sat down again. I didn't wait for apologies. I didn't stay for explanations. I let the room sit with what it now knew. I went upstairs and closed the bedroom door behind me. For the first time in months, the house felt still, not heavy, just honest. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It unfolded slowly, unevenly, the way things do when too many lies have been holding something up for too long. Once the truth was spoken out loud, it stopped belonging to me. It moved on its own, through conversations I wasn't part of, through silences that stretched longer than anyone expected. I stayed upstairs that night. I heard voices rise and fall below me. Questions. Arguments. Defenses that sounded weaker each time they were repeated. I didn't listen closely. I didn't need to. I already knew what they would say. I had heard it all before, just not spoken so openly. By morning, the house felt unfamiliar again, but in a different way. Like a place that had finally exhaled after holding its breath for months. My sister didn't come down for breakfast. My husband sat at the table alone, staring into his cup like it held answers he couldn't find anywhere else. When he looked up at me, his expression wasn't angry. It wasn't even guilty. It was lost. He tried to talk. He said things hadn't been meant to go this far. He said people made mistakes. He said words like confusion and stress and timing, as if any of them could explain intention. I listened quietly. Then I told him I was going out. I didn't tell him where. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't explain. I just picked up my keys and left. Over the next few days, things unraveled quickly. Family members called. Some asked questions. Some avoided them. Some chose sides without saying it out loud. The narrative my sister and husband had built so carefully began to crack under the weight of too many witnesses. My sister tried to talk to me once. She stood in the doorway of my room, not crying, not angry, just defensive. She said people were being unfair. She said I had embarrassed her. She said I didn't have to expose everything the way I did. I looked at her and realized something final. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she'd been seen. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I told her she needed to find somewhere else to stay. Not immediately. Not dramatically. Just firmly. She left that evening with the same suitcase she had arrived with. This time, she didn't look tired. She looked defeated. My husband stayed, but not in the way he used to. He moved through the house like a guest who had overstayed his welcome. He avoided rooms. He avoided eye contact. He avoided responsibility. People stopped asking me how I was holding up. They started asking him what he was going to do. That shift mattered. The plans he and my sister had made became useless overnight. Documents had to be rewritten. Accounts questioned. Decisions revisited. The future they had assumed was guaranteed suddenly required explanation. I watched it all from a distance. I didn't interfere. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. The consequences were doing their work without me. Point one evening. As I stood alone in the living room, I looked at the couch. The same armrest. The place where the scarf had first caught my attention. It felt strange how something so small had led here, not with chaos, but with truth. And as the house settled into a quieter, emptier rhythm, I understood something clearly for the first time in months. The worst part was over, not because they had fallen, but because I no longer had to hold up a story that wasn't mine. Leaving didn't happen in a rush. There was no suitcase packed in anger, no dramatic goodbye at the door. That would have meant I was still reacting to them. I wasn't. I waited. I waited until the house adjusted to its new truth. Until the silence felt different. Not tense. Not watchful. Just empty in places that used to be loud with deception. I waited until my sister was no longer a presence I felt even when she wasn't there. Until her name stopped appearing in conversations like an unfinished sentence. I waited until my husband stopped trying to explain himself. At first, he talked too much. He filled the space with apologies that didn't ask for forgiveness, only relief. Then he talked less. Then not at all. Eventually, he learned what I already knew. Some things don't come back once they've been fully seen. I moved through the house slowly, touching things I had once believed were permanent. The table where we ate. The hallway where I first noticed footsteps at night. The couch where everything began with something as small as a scarf. I realized then that the house had never betrayed me. People had. Point one morning, I woke up and knew it was time. Not because I felt strong. Not because I felt healed. But because I felt finished. I told my husband I was leaving. I didn't argue. I didn't justify. I didn't list reasons. I told him calmly, like I was stating a fact that had already been decided long before that moment. He didn't try to stop me. That hurt less than I thought it would. I packed only what mattered. Not everything. Just enough. I left behind the things that belonged to a version of my life that no longer existed. I didn't want reminders. I wanted space. As I closed the door behind me, I felt something settle instead of break. Relief. Outside, the air felt lighter. The world felt wider. I realized how small my life had become while I was trying to protect people who didn't deserve protection. I didn't look back. In the weeks that followed, I heard things through others. Not directly. I didn't need details. I knew the shape of the ending already. My sister struggled. My husband faced questions he couldn't answer. The future they had planned so carefully never took form, not because I destroyed it, but because it was built on something hollow. I learned something important during that time. Closure doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from understanding. From seeing people clearly and choosing not to carry their weight anymore. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was free. Some nights, I thought about how easily my sister had smiled while taking what wasn't hers. How confidently my husband had believed he could rewrite my life without my consent. They had mistaken kindness for permission. They had mistaken silence for absence. They had mistaken love for weakness. They were wrong. I didn't walk away quietly because I had nothing to say. I walked away quietly because I had already said everything that mattered. And this time, I chose myself. The end.